Out of all the sons of Socrates, Epicurus seems to have wound up with the worst reputation. Why? What did he do that was so much different than the others? And does he really deserve that bad reputation that he got during the Renaissance? We'll find out the answer to these and more questions as we keep on talking philosophy. Well, in the strictest of senses, I guess we could say that Epicurus wasn't so much a son of Socrates as a grandson of Socrates. He didn't study with anyone who studied directly with Socrates. Crates, one of the Cynics, was the closest he came. His real intellectual forefather was Democritus, who, along with Leucippus, forwarded the idea of atomic theory, the idea that the universe is made up of little bitty atoms moving through the void. Atoms and the Void. I always thought that'd be a great band name. Anyway, this atomic reality, this materialistic reality, was new and different. You had the very earliest thinkers saying there's earth and air and fire and water, and everything's made of water, everything's made of earth, it's made of the four of them mixed together, it's made from the four plus the ether. All of these stories come along, but Democritus comes close to saying something very like what we tend to think is true today. And Epicurus only adds one little feature to Democritus' account. Democritus describes the atoms as being of different degrees of subtlety, of size, for different sorts of things. The very finest being soul atoms, and the very coarsest being rocks and boulders and whatnot. But for Democritus, these all moved in a pattern that, as things collided in their pattern, formed the world that we live in. For Epicurus, the atoms could be swerved through the pattern. This was his attempt at getting to free will, that we weren't completely programmed, we weren't completely hardwired, and there was room for the atoms to move a little under their own impetus. This, beginning with a sort of physical account of things as a starting point for philosophy, is also sort of not Socratic. You'll recall, if you've saw my Socrates video, Socrates really wasn't much about physics. He was all about ethics for the most part. He had what we might call some metaphysical interests in terms of definitions and categories, but the problems of the real world, of the physical world, he completely said he was disinterested in. That was one of his defenses in his apology. Now, along with this interest in the real world as atoms in the void, he also followed one of the immediate sons of Socrates, Aristippus, who gave us, of course, the Cyrenaic school. Epicurus bought the idea that pleasure was the good, that pleasure and experiencing pleasure is good. Now, contextually, we have to understand that this does not mean the kind of wanton pursuit of the good that we saw in the Cyrenaics. Instead, his notion of it is to keep it moderate, because after all, extreme pleasures will lead to extreme pains thereafter, either as a result of the pleasure itself or the loss of that pleasure. Because again, atoms are moving through the void. Everything is changing all the time. There is no guarantee that the pleasure will remain, and when you lose it, if it's too good a pleasure, we'll miss it when it's gone. And he doesn't want that. The goal here, then, is really to attain the state of the gods. Epicurus is often identified as an atheist. That's not quite right. It wasn't so much that Epicurus thought there were no gods as it was that the gods weren't interested in us. And why would they be, he reasoned. He says, look, the gods are perfect. Anything that's perfect, by definition, does not change, because if it changed, it wouldn't be perfect anymore. Or if it needed to change to become perfect, it wasn't perfect to begin with. So the gods, being perfect, don't care about humanity, don't care about our prayers, don't care about our problems, don't even care to send us grief. All they do is rest in complete peace in the combined states of painlessness and disinterest. Again, we're talking here the two Greek words, ataraxia, and that's that absence of passion, and aponia, the absence of bodily pain. And this is the goal. The gods had that already, but this is our goal. So how can we attain that goal? Well, let's not get rushed. Epicurus wants to say that all there is atoms in the void. Therefore, all we can know is the motion of those atoms in the void. It is not a matter of meditation to learn. It is not a matter of reflection to learn. It is not learned through logic. It is not learned through some kind of transcendental deduction. The world is experienced through our senses. The world is real to our senses. It is not somehow otherworldly, somehow transcendent beyond our normal everyday experience. This is life. What we see is life. What happens to us in a physical way is our life. Therefore, our knowledge is of that life. So what we know through our senses. And what do we know through our senses that is good? Pleasure. What do we know through our senses that is bad? Pain. However, it's very interesting that according to Epicurus, pleasure is easy to come by and is the source of good. Whereas pain, while the source of bad, needn't to be avoided because pain passes quickly. Well, you've got to remember, he lives in a time where real serious pain was either the result of a trauma and thus going to clear up once the trauma healed, or was going to kill you. You don't have real analgesics. The kinds of injuries that are tied to real pain were fatal. And that's what he says. He says of pain, it's either brief and intense, but never too intense to get back to pleasure, or if it carries on, we eventually learn to bury it under the pleasure around us, and we learn to live with it. And of course, it is possible that we die, but that is of no importance. No importance. Because here's what he says. When we die, our atoms disperse. And when our atoms disperse, then we are no more. So how can we be miserable or feel pain or be in any way upset by having died? Having died, we stop being. It might serve at this point to take a look at the two other big schools. One is Plato, and I've got a whole series of videos to talk about Plato. But the one thing you need to remember about Plato is that for Plato, what is real is not everyday experience. What is real is what is permanent, what is lasting. He describes it as the world of the forms. And I promise you, I've got a whole little series on spelunking with Plato that'll help you understand that better. But for Plato, knowledge and reality are transcendent. Now, for the Stoics, knowledge and reality are integral to everyday life. It's natural, but it's the kind of natural that isn't really so much about what we sense as it is about what we think. Our logic takes us to where we need to go. Our reflection on the order of the universe is how we come to knowledge and wisdom. This is not for Epicurus. Think about it this way. The Stoics, their school was the Stoa. And I will remind you, Stoa means porch in Greek and is not a reference to a store found in Virginia. So the Stoa is orderly, organized, natural, constructed with a logical pattern. I mean, it's a stoa. It's a porch on a temple. Think about what they look like. Plato, on the other hand, is in his academy, an acanthus tree stand. They're beautiful trees. They're tall. They're majestic. They project us beyond everyday life. And that's where Plato wants us to go, to this higher reality. Epicurus stakes out a middle ground. His school isn't the academy. It isn't the stoa. He calls it the garden. It's even more than just a school. It's a commune. It's a way of life. It's people coming together, teaching one another, helping each other find the pleasure, deal with the pain. Moving forward without the profundity of Plato or the reflection of the Stoic. For the Epicureans, this garden, this organized nature, this majesty tamed by human mind and experience, this is Epicurus's garden, the place where he's going to teach you to lead the good life. Now, as I've said, the good life is the life of ataraxia, of aponia. It is a world where pain is minimized, where pleasure is middle ground. We don't look for the highs so we can avoid the lows. It's interesting to me that so many of the ancients thought so highly of being at peace over being filled with joy. You see it in the Socratics, the post-Socratics here, his sons that we've looked at so far, all of them really. You see it in Confucius, you see it in Lao Tzu. It's just the Buddha, when he's trying to teach you the way to nirvana, is trying to teach you the way to where there is no pleasure and there is no pain, where everything is at peace, at rest. Why are they so in love with peace? Well, we'll talk more about that. I've got one more talk on the Sons of Socrates plan, but it is something to keep in mind as we look back at them and try to learn from them, that their goal is not necessarily the one we look for, that it is rest, peace, harmony, not necessarily joy, communion, ecstasy, the best state of affairs. Well, let's just put it this way. According to Epicurus, you should not get married because being with somebody else just does not bring enough pleasure to surmount the pain of perhaps winding up in a bad marriage. You shouldn't have children because, again, the pleasures associated with being a parent may not outweigh the pains associated with being a parent. He says of sexual intercourse, well, if you gotta, you gotta, but it'd be better if you didn't. Again, he's not, when we talk about Epicureans pursuing pleasure, it's not the pleasure you and I normally think of. What they're looking for is a good conversation, a good glass of wine, a good meal. Not a great meal, not an extravagant meal. Beans, rice, some olive oil, maybe a glass of the local red. That's their meal. That's their ideal. They want simplicity. They want pleasures that are understandable and accessible. They want freedom from everyday problems. And he feels justified in saying it's worth looking at. Look, he says, don't go into politics. What's there to be gotten out of that? Sure, maybe you could help everybody have a little more peace and quiet, but what if you can't? What are all the responsibilities? What are they going to do to your own peace and quiet? Well, I said that the Epicureans got a bad reputation. Well, if you haven't thought about it already, let me make it quite clear. One, they're materialists, and certainly the post-Platonics, as it moves on into Neoplatonism, as it moves on into particularly Christian thinking, for them, the material world is something that's essentially a epiphenomenon. That is to say, it's something that's there, but it's of no importance. We have to deal with it, but it's not why we're here. It's not what life is about. It's not what truth is about. It's not what creation is about. Creation, truth, life, that's all about the divine, the eternal, the world beyond our normal physical existence. And he's saying, no, no, no. Today is the day. We live for now. This is all we have. It's all we know. So that made him unpopular. It made him unpopular in that he suggested the pursuit of pleasure was a good thing. Again, there is this anti-pleasure thing going on, and it's going on in Plato before we ever get to Christianity. Okay? This whole idea that the world of the senses deludes us and keeps us from the higher reality that we're supposed to be working toward. And Epicurus is saying, no, no, no. This is the good life. This is what's to be looked for. Truth is in our senses. Reality is in our experience. Happiness is in maintaining peace and balance. And we will find that peace and balance by moderating our pleasures, by minimizing our pains. You know, there's no afterlife. There's no idea that anything should ever be thought about in terms of the long-range goals. It just really left him in a bad spot. It wasn't until Gassendi, and I know you all are big Gassendi fans out there, and Descartes to an extent, start reviving the Epicurean approach to life. It really gets back underway with Hobbes and with Hume. They start giving us the idea that the physical world that is proposed by Epicurus isn't such a bad thing. It might even be the right thing. It might even be the truth. I can only wind up here with Voltaire. Famously, Voltaire closes Candide, and real quick, Candide. Candide is his parody of Leibniz. Leibniz says this is the best of all possible worlds. We'll get to all of this. Relax, relax. Says this is the best of all possible worlds. Now, to be fair to Leibniz, he doesn't quite mean it the way that Voltaire takes it. But that's okay, because right now we're just worried about Voltaire. And so he makes fun of the people who say that by taking them to all the horrible, terrible things that are going on in the world right then, right now, and going, really? This is the best of all possible worlds? This is the best you can manage? And so at the end, after all these experiences, and from which Candide is rescued in the end, at the end, when the Dr. Pangloss, who got him in this mess to start with, comes to him and says, Candide, what's the lesson from this? Candide says, stay home, tend your garden. I don't think that was a coincidence. I think Voltaire is thinking of Epicurus's garden, that the best world is the small world, is the world without trouble, without problem, without pressure. A world where we can enjoy our little pleasures, be at peace with ourselves, and not have to worry about any problems beyond right now. There's so much more to say about Epicureanism. There's a real revival of it going on today. I'm trying to put a link or two down below to suggest some places you might go look if you want to look further. And of course, I will provide links to some key writings from Epicurus. Please, if you're enjoying these things, subscribe down below. If I can get 100 subscriptions, I get to make an easy to remember URL instead of that hobgoblin you see up in the address box right now. Suggest it to others. Please ask questions. As I say, this is intended to be a chance for me to chat with you and talk with you. If you're not enjoying it, but you'd like to enjoy it more, say something. Maybe I can react and make it better. I've still got one more thing I want to say about the Epicureans and the Stoics. I've got the series on Plato. Coming up, I'm going to be talking about objectivity and subjectivity. I hope you keep coming back. I hope you keep talking philosophy.